The rain was merciless that evening, soaking Lena's thin clothes as she wandered the empty streets. Her stomach ached with hunger, and rejection had become a familiar friend. That's when she spotted it, an elegant leather wallet, carelessly dropped near a cafe entrance. She opened it, eyes widening at the stack of crisp bills and high-end credit cards. For a brief, trembling moment, she imagined what life could be with that money. No more cold nights, no more hunger. Most people wouldn't blame her for keeping it. After all, life hadn't exactly been fair. But Lena wasn't most people.
Hello, I'm going to tell you this incredible story. Put on your headphones for a better experience and sit comfortably because you're going to be moved. Remember that to receive new stories like this, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, and activate the notification bell. Without further ado, let's get to the rest of the story.
Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her that real dignity comes not from what we possess, but from what we refuse to take. In that moment, Lena wasn't a homeless woman. She was someone holding the power to choose what kind of person she wanted to be. That choice would write the first page of her emotional story. She carefully inspected the ID inside. A name, an address, a chance to do something different, something right. It wasn't just about the wallet anymore. It was about reclaiming a sense of self-worth that life on the streets had tried to erase. And so, without a second thought, she tucked it under her coat and started walking, miles through rain and wind, just to return what didn't belong to her. Every step she took was a step away from the past that had tried to define her. She was tired, cold, and soaked to the bone, but something burned inside. An old flame her grandmother had kept alive with bedtime stories of honesty and honor. And while the world outside was deaf to such ideals, Lena chose to believe in them. Real story moments like these are rare, but they matter more than we think. They remind us who we are when no one's watching. By the time she reached the address, the night had swallowed the city. The gate before her towered high, an emblem of a world she didn't belong to. Still, Lena stood firm, the weight of the wallet grounding her. Her journey wasn't just physical. It was emotional, layered with decades of rejection, survival, and now a flicker of hope. Touching stories don't always start in comfort. They rise from desperation and decency. She pressed the buzzer with trembling fingers. A part of her wanted to run, to disappear into the shadows again. But she stayed. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the intensity of this simple act. Would anyone believe her? Would anyone care that she had returned something she could have easily kept? This was the moment that would decide whether her emotional story would end in silence or begin with something bigger. As the gate creaked open and heavy steps approached from inside, Lena held her breath. What she didn't know was that beyond that door stood a man whose life was about to be forever changed. And what he saw in her eyes, pure, unshaken integrity, would shake something long buried within him. Because sometimes it takes a stranger's honesty to awaken the forgotten corners of a guarded heart. The mansion looked more like a museum than a home. Tall, cold, and intimidating. Lena stood at the gate, soaked and shivering, holding the wallet like a fragile treasure. The security guard took one glance at her and curled his lip. "No handouts here," he muttered, already turning away. But Lena, used to being dismissed, didn't flinch. She calmly replied, "I'm not here for charity. I need to speak to Mr. Carter." The guard scoffed, the way people do when they've already decided who you are. Her clothes were torn, her hair dripping, and her shoes falling apart. But her voice held something rare, conviction. It wasn't loud, but it had weight. And in a world where appearances speak louder than truth, that quiet determination was enough to crack open a door that should have stayed shut. After a long wait, filled with sideways glances and whispered laughter, the unexpected happened. A tall man emerged, his posture tense, his expression unreadable. Daniel Carter, the billionaire himself, stood before the woman everyone had tried to ignore. Lena looked him straight in the eye and handed him the wallet, untouched. "I think this belongs to you," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Daniel stared at the contents, thumbing through the cash, the cards, everything intact. He looked back at her, baffled. "You didn't take anything?" he asked, almost incredulous. Lena just shook her head. "It wasn't mine to take." That sentence, so simple, struck him like lightning. This wasn't just a good deed. It was the beginning of a touching story that would reshape his understanding of people. He'd seen too much greed in his lifetime. Too many smiles that came with expectations. Too many thank yous hiding agendas. But here stood a woman who had nothing and still chose to give everything. It stirred something in Daniel that had long been dormant. A trust in humanity, cracked but not yet broken. Sometimes, the poorest among us carry the richest hearts. That was the real story unfolding right before his eyes. Lena wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't trying to manipulate. She just wanted to sleep that night, knowing she'd done the right thing. And in doing so, she became the mirror Daniel didn't know he needed, to reflect what true character looked like. That day, the billionaire met someone more powerful than wealth itself. A woman with nothing to lose and everything to give. And something in him softened. As he invited her in, unsure of what to say next, he noticed something odd. His son's laughter, something he hadn't heard in years, echoed faintly from the next room. It was almost like the house itself was responding to Lena's presence. As if her act of kindness had stirred more than just emotions. It had cracked open a silent door in someone else too. The first time Lena saw Noah, he was curled on the floor beside a toy he clearly hadn't touched in months. His big brown eyes were blank, too old for his age, too quiet for a child. Daniel had warned her gently. He doesn't talk much anymore. But Lena didn't try to fix him. She just sat beside him, silent at first, letting her warmth fill the empty space like sunlight creeping through a closed window. She didn't ask questions, didn't push. Instead, she took one of the toys and started making it talk in the silliest voice she could muster. At first, nothing. Then, just the faintest flicker, a twitch at the corner of his lips. Encouraged, she kept going, letting her imagination run wild until, suddenly, a soft giggle broke the silence. It was small but powerful, a sound Daniel hadn't heard since his wife passed away. Daniel froze in the doorway, eyes wide. That laugh wasn't just noise, it was a spark. It was as if Lena had reached inside Noah's locked heart and found the key no therapist ever could. Touching stories often begin with small, tender moments like this, unplanned, unforced, and entirely genuine. And for a man who had almost given up on seeing his son smile again, it felt like witnessing a miracle. From that moment on, Noah followed Lena everywhere. He didn't talk much at first, but he started humming, pointing, laughing more often. Lena had that rare gift, not just of patience, but of presence. She didn't treat Noah like a project. She treated him like a person. A real story was unfolding right there, and neither Daniel nor Lena truly understood its magnitude yet. But they felt it in their bones. With each day, Lena became more than a guest in their home. She became a source of comfort, stability, and love. Her presence filled the silent corners of the house, the places grief had hollowed out. Noah started drawing again. He named his stuffed bear after her, and every time she read him a bedtime story, he insisted she stay just a little longer. Something sacred was building, slow and beautiful. Daniel watched all this in quiet awe. He, too, began to feel something shifting in himself. It had been so long since the house had heard laughter or seen spontaneous dance in the kitchen. Lena wasn't just healing Noah, she was healing Daniel too, without even trying. That's the power of emotional story arcs. They heal in layers, sometimes starting with the smallest crack of light. What Lena didn't know, though, was that Daniel had already made a decision. She wasn't going anywhere, not if he had a say in it, but not because he pitted her. No, it was something else entirely taking root. And as she tucked Noah into bed that night, humming a lullaby from her childhood, the future was quietly rearranging itself around her. The offer came over breakfast, almost casually, though Daniel had rehearsed it in his mind 100 times. "Would you consider staying as Noah's caregiver?" he asked, his voice laced with both hope and hesitation. Lena looked up, surprised, toast halfway to her mouth. She wasn't used to people offering her trust. only conditions. But in Daniel's eyes, there was no charity, only respect. And that changed everything. She nodded slowly, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. It wasn't about the job or the paycheck. It was the chance to be part of something meaningful, to rebuild a life from the inside out. Touching stories don't always start with love. They start with trust. And for Lena, trust was the soil where her self-worth could finally grow roots again. Days turned into weeks, and Lena found herself falling into a rhythm. Meals with Noah, garden walks with Daniel, soft conversations under warm lights. The house no longer felt intimidating. It felt like a home. Her emotional story began to intertwine with theirs in ways none of them could have predicted. And somewhere along the way, Daniel asked, "Have you ever thought about studying child psychology?" Lena blinked, caught off guard. No one had ever asked her about her dreams. They always assumed she didn't have any. But the truth was, she'd once wanted to help kids just like Noah. Daniel offered to cover her tuition. "You're already doing the work," he said. "Might as well get the papers to prove it." His support wasn't flashy, it was steady, the kind that builds real confidence, not dependency. With each class she took, Lena stood taller. Her mind lit up with new ideas, and she began applying what she learned with Noah in real time. Daniel watched in admiration as both of them blossomed under her care. The house, once a museum of grief, became a playground of second chances. Real story moments like these prove that healing isn't a destination. It's a journey shared with people who believe in us. One evening, after dinner, Daniel said something that stuck with her. "You don't just take care of Noah. You've helped me come back to life too." She smiled, not knowing what to say. But inside, she understood. They were rebuilding more than a home. They were building a new version of themselves. One forged in honesty, quiet strength, and unexpected companionship. And yet, beneath all the growth, something deeper was beginning to take shape. A look, a lingering moment, a laugh that lasted a little longer than before. Lena had come to this house with nothing but integrity. Now, she was being wrapped into something bigger, warmer. A feeling she hadn't dared to name. Yet, love didn't crash in like a storm. It crept in gently, on quiet mornings and shared glances across the dinner table. Lena noticed in the way Daniel watched her read to Noah, or how his hand would linger just a moment longer when passing her a plate. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Real story connections aren't built on fairy tales. They're built on moments. Honest, unspoken, steady moments. Daniel wrestled with his feelings at first. Was it gratitude? Was it admiration? Or was it something deeper, something rare? He realized that what he felt for Lena wasn't about what she'd done, but who she was. Her presence had restored laughter to his son and warmth to his heart. Emotional storylines like this remind us that healing often leads to love when we least expect it. One crisp autumn morning, under the oak tree in the backyard, Daniel reached into his pocket. Not for a wallet this time, but for a ring. "Lena," he began, "you didn't just bring back my son. You brought me back, too." His voice cracked, raw with sincerity. She covered her mouth in shock, not from disbelief, but from the overwhelming truth that she felt the same. She said yes, through tears. They married in an intimate ceremony, Noah at their side, grinning with a joy that hadn't touched his face in years. The house, once filled with silence, now echoed with laughter, stories, and the sound of a family being reborn. Lena didn't wear designer gowns or diamonds. She wore grace, humility, and the kind of beauty that grows from surviving and choosing kindness anyway. It was a truly emotional story, one that touched every soul who witnessed it. Not long after, Lena discovered she was pregnant. She stood in the hallway, holding the test, hands shaking. Daniel found her crying, not from fear but from joy. "I never thought I'd have all this," she whispered. And neither had he. Their home, once sterile and still, began to pulse with life. Real story endings often don't feel like endings at all. They feel like the beginning of something even more miraculous. Lena's belly grew, and so did the bond between them. She and Daniel weren't perfect, but they were present. They made mistakes, they laughed, they grew together. And Noah, no longer the quiet boy in the corner, became a protective big brother, drawing pictures of their soon-to-be family of 4. Touching stories like theirs remind us that families aren't always born. They're built, piece by piece, in love. And to think, it all began with a lost wallet. That simple decision to return what wasn't hers unraveled years of pain, rewrote destinies, and stitched together 3 lives that desperately needed one another. But if you think that's where the story ends, well, some beginnings are too powerful to close so easily. And now I ask you, what would you have done if you were in Lena's shoes? Would you have returned that wallet, knowing it could feed you for weeks? Or would you have chosen integrity, just like she did, without expecting anything in return? Stories like this remind us that sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with the smallest choices. But I want to hear from you. Do you believe that honesty still has a place in today's world? Or is Lena just a rare exception? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading every single one of them. And hey, if this emotional story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next real story that might just change the way you see the world.